High atop the craggy cliffs of the Balanoch Mountains stands a castle of stone and shadow, its towers slicing the sky like jagged teeth. Within its walls resides a lord unlike any other, a being of brilliance, ambition, and unspeakable darkness. His name is Strahd von Zarovich, and his story is one of love, betrayal, and a curse that spans centuries. Welcome to Barovia, a land trapped in mist, despair, and the endless will of its vampire lord. In this video, we'll journey through Strahd's mortal beginnings, the pact that damned him, the twisted land he rules, and the cycles of visitors who dare to challenge him. We'll explore Castle Ravenloft, the dark powers that hold him captive, and the legacy that makes him the archetypal vampire of Dungeons & Dragons. So, prepare yourselves, for the mists are waiting. Before he became the Lord of Barovia, the vampire who commands storms and shadows, Strahd von Zarovich was a man of flesh and blood. He was born a mortal prince, heir to a proud dynasty of conquerors, and his story begins not with darkness, but with ambition. Strahd was the eldest son of King Bram and Queen Ravnia von Zarovich, rulers of a once great kingdom in a distant land whose name has been lost to time. From his youth, Strahd showed a fierce intellect and a soldier's heart. He was trained in the arts of war, leadership, and the rigid honor of nobility. But where his younger brother Sergei was loved and gentle, Strahd was stern, proud, and often burdened by the expectations of his birthright. As war swept across the lands, Strahd led his father's armies in brutal campaigns that forged his legend. He was a commander of immense skill, unyielding, methodical, and utterly devoted to victory. The early Ravenloft materials describe him as a conqueror without peer, and his conquests stretched across mountain ranges and broken kingdoms alike. Yet, even as his empire grew, so did his weariness. Strahd's victories brought him no peace. The joy of triumph faded quickly, leaving only a hollow ache in its place. The bloodshed that once stirred his heart became a weight upon it. "I was old before my years," he would later confess in I, Strahd, reflecting on the toll of endless war. His youth had been spent in conquest, his middle years in consolidation, and his old age, though his body still strong, was haunted by a longing he could not name. It was during this restless period that Strahd turned his gaze toward the valley of Barovia, a mist-shrouded land nestled between the Balanoch Mountains. He saw it as both a natural fortress and a place of renewal, a final gift to his aging parents, and a realm he might rule in peace. Gathering his armies, he marched through the mountain passes and drove out the tribes that dwelled there, claiming the valley in his family's name. He named the land Barovia in honor of his late father, King Bram, and ordered the construction of a mighty fortress upon the cliffs overlooking the valley. This fortress would later become his eternal prison, Castle Ravenloft, named for his beloved mother. Its spires rose from the rock like dark fingers grasping the sky, a symbol of his triumph and soon of his tragedy. When his family came to dwell in the valley, Strahd's brother Sergei arrived as well. Sergei was everything Strahd was not: youthful, radiant, and kind. Where the elder prince was hardened by war, the younger was blessed with innocence and grace, and it was this grace that caught the eye of Tatiana Ferdinova, a young woman of Barovia whose beauty was said to rival the morning sun. Strahd loved her first, or so he believed. In his eyes, she embodied the purity and vitality that he had lost through the decades of bloodshed. Yet Tatiana's heart belonged to Sergei. Their love blossomed quickly, and though Strahd attempted to bless their union, jealousy festered within him. The novel I, Strahd portrays this inner torment with painful clarity. Strahd admired his brother's goodness even as he despised it. He felt cheated by the years, by the gods, and by the cruel trick of fate that gave Sergei the affection he himself craved. His pride demanded restraint, but his heart was a battlefield. By this time, Strahd had already begun to fear the shadow of death. He saw in Sergei and Tatiana the youth he could never reclaim, and in their love a future that excluded him entirely. The halls of Castle Ravenloft, his masterpiece, echoed with emptiness. In Strahd, he writes, "I built this castle as a monument to my family and to peace, yet I find no peace within it." The endless corridors and towering walls that should have stood as symbols of his triumph became monuments to his isolation. When his mother, Queen Ravnia, died, something within him broke. Her death deepened the rift between his desire for life and his awareness of its fleeting nature. It was then that he began to search for a way to halt the passage of time, to conquer death itself, as he had conquered nations. Thus, as Strahd recounts, the mortal prince began his descent into darkness. He turned away from faith and toward forbidden knowledge, seeking any means to preserve his power and his life. The foundation of Barovia was not merely the creation of a kingdom, but the stage upon which Strahd would wage his final and most tragic war, not against an enemy of flesh, but against mortality itself. At the close of his mortal life, Strahd von Zarovich stood upon the balcony of Castle Ravenloft, looking out across the mists of his new domain. He had everything a man could desire: land, title, legacy, and yet nothing that he truly wanted. And so, as the mists gathered below and thunder rolled in the distance, the mortal prince of Barovia began to dream of eternity. It was during the long nights in Castle Ravenloft that Strahd began to seek out whispers of forbidden power. He studied ancient texts brought from far-off lands, communed with hermits, and turned his prayers from the gods of light to any who might answer. He found his answer in a dark power whose name he never really learned, a presence that offered him youth eternal and mastery over life and death. The bargain was not sealed in words, but in blood and desire. He offered his soul freely. In return, the shadow gave him what he wished for, the strength to seize his destiny and the means to make it so. In Curse of Strahd, this moment is remembered as the pact that sealed his doom, a secret covenant with the dark forces that dwell beyond mortal comprehension, forces now known as the dark powers of the Shadowfell. Strahd felt no immediate change. His flesh remained aged, his reflection unchanged. But within him, something stirred, an ancient hunger that had no name, a whisper in his veins promising that the moment would soon come. It came on the day of Sergei and Tatiana's wedding. The castle was filled with light and song, its great halls decorated in garlands of silver and crimson. Strahd watched from the shadows as his brother, dressed in white and gold, took Tatiana's hand before the altar. He should have felt joy for them. Instead, he felt his heart turn to iron. As the vows were spoken, the pact he had made came to fruition. The darkness that had waited now claimed its due. Strahd's envy became fury, and an all-consuming storm that blotted out reason. When Sergei turned to embrace his bride, Strahd struck. "I killed him," Strahd writes in Strahd, "my own brother. I murdered him with my sword and let his blood flow across the floor of my own chapel." The moment Sergei fell, Tatiana screamed and fled, her bridal gown streaked with her lover's blood. The guards, horrified, turned their weapons upon their lord. Strahd cut them down without effort, his new power surging like fire through his veins. Arrows pierced him, blades struck him down, yet death no longer held dominion over him. The soldiers' eyes filled with terror as the wounds they dealt closed, and Strahd rose again, undying, unholy, and unbound in the mortal coil. The pact was complete. Tatiana, seeing what he had become, fled through the corridors of Castle Ravenloft, chased by the man she had once called my lord. She ran to the outer balcony, where the setting sun cast the valley below in shades of crimson mist. Strahd called to her, pleading that he had done it all for love, that they could still be together forever. But Tatiana saw only the monster he had become. With tears in her eyes, she whispered Sergei's name, and threw herself from the heights into the mists below. Her body vanished into the fog, lost to both time and memory. That moment, her fall, and his cry of anguish echoes through Curse of Strahd and the earliest Ravenloft material alike. It was the instant when both Strahd and the land itself were claimed by the darkness. As the life of Tatiana faded, the castle shuddered. The sun was blotted out, and the great thunder rolled across the valley. Strahd stumbled through the halls, his hands slick with his brother's blood. He called for his guards, his priests, his family, but none answered. The mists rose around the castle and crept down the mountainsides, swallowing Barovia whole. When the silence lifted, the realm was gone. The lands beyond the mountains had vanished. Only the valley remained, surrounded by endless fog. Strahd had achieved immortality, but not freedom. He and his land had been drawn into the demiplane of dread, imprisoned by the dark powers who had answered his call. In Domains of Dread, this transformation is described as the birth of Ravenloft, the first domain of that cursed plane. Strahd became its first Dark Lord, bound to Barovia by the same forces that had granted his wish. He could never leave, never die, and never again taste true joy. When Strahd awoke in the stillness that followed, his hunger was unbearable. He found a servant's body and drank deeply, learning too late what immortality truly meant. His thirst would never end. He was now a vampire, condemned to live forever, haunted by his crimes. In I, Strahd, his words are filled with bitter clarity. I have become the land, and the land has become me. We are bound, both cursed, both eternal. The mists that surrounded Barovia became both walls and mirrors, reflecting Strahd's own torment. He had won his victory over death, but at the cost of everything that made life worth living. Thus ended the life of Strahd von Zarovich, the mortal prince. And thus began the eternal reign of Strahd the vampire, Lord of Barovia, master of Ravenloft, the first soul ever to be damned by the dark powers. When Strahd von Zarovich rose from the blood-soaked floor of his chapel, Barovia itself rose with him. No longer a kingdom of men, but a domain of despair. The mists closed around the valley like a shroud, and the world beyond simply ceased to exist. From that moment forward, Strahd and Barovia were bound together in an endless, tragic reflection. The land became his prison, and he became its lord. According to Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, the Valley of Barovia was the first land to be drawn into the demiplane of dread, a realm outside of time and space, ruled not by gods but by shadowy entities known only as the Dark Powers. They gave Strahd the immortality he craved, but twisted it into eternal torment. In Ravenloft in 1983, this moment is described as the birth of the Land of the Mists, a place formed when, from Strahd's own sins and memories, everything within Barovia became a reflection of him. The crumbling castles, the brooding skies, the fearful peasants who lived and died beneath his gaze. The sunlight dimmed as though filtered through ash. The wind grew cold and whispered his name. Even the earth itself seemed to recoil from joy. The Dark Powers did not merely imprison Strahd, they remade Barovia in his image. It became a land of eternal autumn, where day never quite banished the night, and hope never fully bloomed. Barovia, as described in Curse of Strahd, is a valley enclosed by the Balanoch Mountains, its borders fading into the mists that serve as both wall and illusion. Travelers who wander into them often find themselves lost in endless fog, eventually returning to the same cursed roads or vanishing altogether. The valley's geography mirrors Strahd's mind, isolated, oppressive, and beautiful in its decay. To the north lie the Slavic woods, an ancient forest where even the trees seem to watch intruders. To the east, the Seer Falls plunge from dizzying heights, their roar echoing against the cliffs beneath Castle Ravenloft. The old Slavic road winds through the land like a scar, connecting its scattered settlements, each a fading ember of the life that once was. The largest and oldest settlement, the village of Barovia, lies in the shadow of Castle Ravenloft itself. Its people live in constant fear of their master, locking their doors at dusk and whispering prayers that go unanswered. The innkeeper and the priest may smile, but their eyes betray the weight of generations spent under the vampire's reign. As Curse of Strahd notes, the villagers believe Strahd to be both tyrant and god, an eternal force that cannot be resisted, only endured. Farther west lies Vallaki, a walled town built by those who sought refuge from the Lord's gaze. Its burgomasters cling to desperate rituals meant to keep evil at bay, festivals, parades, and false joy meant to convince themselves that darkness cannot win. Yet even there, Strahd's influence seeps through the cracks. His spies walk the streets unseen, and his laughter drifts on the night wind. Beyond Vallaki stands Kresh, a somber settlement nestled against the mountains. Its people are guarded and deeply pious, watching the world with suspicion. The nearby abbey of St. Markovia once offered sanctuary, but now serves as a grim reminder of the futility of redemption. The abbey's holy halls have long since been defiled, its abbot now a fallen celestial, driven mad by centuries of isolation and Strahd's subtle cruelty. Each of these settlements survives, but none truly live. They are echoes of what Strahd lost, communities forever striving towards hope, even as their lord feeds upon their despair. And within them, there are few who can travel freely through the mists. They are the Vistani, a nomadic people with ancient ties to Strahd. In Ravenloft 1983 and later texts, they are described as wanderers and seers, capable of moving between the worlds where others cannot. Strahd grants them safe passage through his lands, for it was said they once saved his life during a mortal campaign. But even this bond is touched by tragedy. Some Vistani serve Strahd out of loyalty, while others act as reluctant messengers or spies, fearing his wrath. In Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, their freedom is described not as a gift, but as another cruel irony. Their ability to escape Barovia does not spare them the guilt of leaving others behind. They are both part of his curse and witnesses to it, carrying tales of the vampire lord to the worlds beyond. The mists of Ravenloft are the greatest symbol of Strahd's imprisonment and dominion. They obey his will in part, but not entirely. He can summon them to isolate travelers, conceal his approach, or ensnare those who trespass into his realm. Yet even he cannot command them to be open fully. The dark powers use the mists to both leash and barrier, reminding him that though he rules, he does not reign. The mists are described as a living boundary that reflects the mood of their lord. When Strahd grows restless, storms lash the valley. When he broods, fog thickens across the land. Barovia and its master are one. His sorrow darkens the skies, his rage stirs the wind, and his hunger seeps into the soil. Strahd's connection to Barovia is not merely symbolic. It is mystical. His life, unlife, and power are intertwined with the land itself. Curse of Strahd describes him as both ruler and warden. If he were to perish, Barovia would remain, waiting for his inevitable return. Even death is denied him. When destroyed, his body reforms within the walls of Castle Ravenloft, and his domain itself resurrects its master. This cycle of death and rebirth mirrors the endless tragedy of his existence. He cannot escape Barovia, just as Barovia cannot escape him. Together, they form a single cursed being, the land of sorrow and the lord who embodies it. In the centuries that followed his fall, Barovia remained locked in its state of perpetual dusk. Crops grow meagerly, joy fades quickly, and the laughter of children is a sound the wind seems eager to swallow. Yet even in this gloom, Strahd finds no peace. He wanders his halls, plays the same dirges upon his organ, and gazes into the fog, searching for the face of Tatiana, who returns again and again through reincarnation, only to die before she can ever love him. As Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft observes, this is the cruel genius of the dark powers. Strahd's torment is not only eternal, but active. His domain exists to sustain his suffering, to mirror, magnify, and perpetuate it. The peasants' fear, the grey skies, the ceaseless mists, they are all expressions of his damnation. Barovia endures as the first and most complete expression of the demiplane of Dread's terrible design. A world crafted from one man's soul. Its mountains rise like the walls of a tomb, its rivers carry the echoes of ancient sin, and the mists, well, they whisper the name of their lord. And upon the high cliffs of Castle Ravenloft, Strahd von Zarovich stands eternal, ruler, prisoner, a reflection of the land that will never, ever let him go. When Strahd ordered its construction, Castle Ravenloft was meant to be his legacy. He envisioned a stronghold that would endure for centuries, a gift to his family, and a symbol of his conquest. In Ravenloft 1983, it describes its completion as one of his last acts as a mortal man. Towers of black stone, arches like the ribs of a giant beast, and stained glass windows that cast blood-colored light upon its halls. He named it for his mother, Queen Ravnia, hoping to honor her memory. But when the darkness claimed him, the castle changed. In Curse of Strahd, the fortress is described as a place of despair and beauty intertwined. Its walls, though solid, seem to breathe with malice. Its shadows move when no wind stirs them. Every stairwell and balcony carries the weight of centuries, as if the castle itself remembers the moment of Strahd's damnation. What began as a fortress of glory became a monument to hubris, a place where pride turned to isolation and ambition turned to rot. The first adventurers who dared to enter Castle Ravenloft, those immortalized in the original Ravenloft module, found it a labyrinth of both architecture and emotion. It is not merely haunted by ghosts, it is haunted by memory. Within its walls, time seems to distort. Corridors stretch farther than they should, doors seem lead to rooms that should not exist. The castle rearranges itself as if alive, responding to Strahd's moods and the whims of the dark powers who govern its cursed design. In Domains of Dread, 1997, Ravenloft Castle is described as a nexus of dread, the place where the fabric of Barovia and the demiplane of dread is thinnest. Here, Strahd's will is strongest, yet also most constrained. He commands its halls as a sovereign, but he cannot escape them. When slain, his body dissolves into mist and reforms within the castle's crypts. A cruel resurrection decreed by the dark powers. Death offers him no release, only return. This cycle defines the castle. It shelters his power and enforces his punishment. No matter how far he wanders through his realm, Strahd always returns to Castle Ravenloft, drawn back like a shadow to its source. In Curse of Strahd, the castle's rooms read like chapters of Strahd's mind. The chapel of Ravenloft, once a place of prayer, remains stained with his brother Sergei's blood. The audience hall where nobles once gathered to honor their lord is now empty but for the echoes of phantom applause. The dining hall is set perpetually for guests who will never come. And in the highest tower, the study of the vampire lord, Strahd writes by candlelight as if his thoughts could still be ordered, as if penance were possible. The deeper one ventures, the more the castle reveals its true nature. The catacombs, beneath layers of cold stone, are filled with coffins, statues, and sealed vaults, each bearing names for Strahd's long, haunted life. There are crypts for every member of his family, for those who served him, and even for those he loved and lost. In I, Strahd, he describes wandering among them, conversing with their shades, seeking forgiveness that never comes. The castle mirrors him perfectly. Majestic above, decayed below. Powerful in form, but hollow in spirit. Its every stone hums with his sorrow and his arrogance. But the true masters of Castle Ravenloft are not its undead servants, nor even Strahd himself. They are the unseen architects of Barovia, the dark powers. Van Richten's guide names them not as gods, but as inscrutable enemies that feed on mortal emotions. They do not judge good or evil, they cultivate torment. They shape the domains of dread as both reflection and prison, each tailored to its Dark Lord's deepest sins. For Strahd, They created Barovia as its castle, as a perfect mirror, a realm where love forever eludes him, and where his own immortality ensures his pain will never fade. The dark powers watch from beyond the mists, granting Strahd his desires in the most twisted ways. They allow him to reign, but never rule. They grant him immortality, but deny him satisfaction. Every time he reaches for happiness, whether through conquest, art, or the reincarnations of Tatiana, they tear it away. In Domains of Dread, it is said the dark powers sustain his dominion not only so long as his suffering will endure. Should he ever repent, the domain itself might dissolve. But Strahd has never truly sought redemption. His pride is his chain, and the dark powers ensure it never breaks. Beneath Castle Ravenloft's tallest tower lies its most terrible secret, the Heart of Sorrow. It is a massive red crystal that pulses with unnatural life, a physical manifestation of Strahd's immortality. The heart sustains him, healing his wounds and anchoring his spirit to the castle. Destroying it weakens him, but cannot free him. Its destruction only deepens the land's anguish, and in time, it reforms again. The heart symbolizes the dark power's mastery over him. They have externalized his soul, ensuring his torment can be seen and touched, yet never undone. It glows with the same red light that stains the castle's windows, as though the entire fortress is illuminated by Strahd's own cursed heart. Strahd rules Castle Ravenloft as a monarch might rule a memory. He hosts banquets for ghosts, converses with illusions, and plays mournful sonatas upon his pipe organ to an audience of the dead. His power over Barovia is absolute. He can command the weather, call wolves to heel, and stride across his castle as though it were an extension of his own will. Yet none of it brings him solace. Barovia and its castle are described as a closed system of suffering. Strahd's every victory reinforces his imprisonment. When he slays intruders, they rise again in new forms. When he falls in battle, he awakens beneath his own ceiling, surrounded by the same gloom, the same unending sorrow. The dark powers have granted him dominion over everything except release. Castle Ravenloft endures not merely as Strahd's home, but as his confession. His beauty conceals corruption, its grandeur masks loneliness. Like its master, it is immortal, unchanging, and incapable of peace. The thunder that rolls above its spires, the wind that howls through its halls, and the endless echo of footsteps that are never quite one's own, all speak to a single truth. The Lord and the castle are one. To destroy one would be to destroy the other. To redeem one would be to redeem both. And neither has ever known redemption. In the end, Castle Ravenloft is not just a fortress of stone, but a living reminder of what Strahd became when he defied death. It stands forever against the storm, beautiful and broken, as the dark powers watch in silence, feeding on the endless tragedy of a prince who wanted to live forever, and found only eternity instead. In the earliest chronicles, the original Ravenloft adventure published in 1983, the heroes who came to Barovia entered a Gothic nightmare that felt ancient even then. They were outsiders pulled from another world, with only rumors of the vampire and his towering castle. To them, Strahd appeared as a tragic, calculating predator, one who delighted in hunting his prey through corridors of shadow and illusion. At this stage, Strahd was already centuries into his damnation, both host and tormentor in his own realm. He invited heroes to dine with him, to speak, even to duel. Each new arrival was a chance for him to reenact the ancient betrayal that damned him. A ritual of power, love, and murder, endlessly repeated. The villagers of Barovia whispered the vampire's power of his brides, and of a girl who resembled Tatiana reborn. Always, Strahd watched. Always, he waited for the right moment to strike. Strahd's obsession with Tatiana became the defining rhythm of his unlife. Her soul returned again and again, sometimes as a Barovian peasant, sometimes as a seemingly foreign traveler, yet always just out of reach. This endless cycle reaches its most tragic form through Irina Kolyana, a young woman bearing Tatiana's spirit. Strahd, ever convinced that this incarnation would finally love him, stalks her with both tenderness and menace. Yet she, like those before her, sees through the monster he has become. Irina's journey can culminate not in submission but in transcendence. She can escape his grasp, merging with the spirit of her long-lost beloved Sergei at the pool of Kresh. In that moment, Barovia itself seems to shudder, but the cycle does not end. The land closes again, the mists reform, and Strahd awakens once more, doomed to repeat his tragedy. Every generation, or perhaps every world, sends new champions to face him. House of Strahd 1993, Expedition to Castle Ravenloft 2006 retell the same story across editions, showing how Strahd adapts, learns, and toys with his foes. He never simply slaughters them, he studies them. He writes letters, sends invitations, plays host to candlelit halls, a gentleman of death, welcoming guests to his feast. To some, he offers uneasy alliances, to others, cruel tests. His intelligence and charisma remain undiminished by the centuries. He often allows the adventurers to reach the heart of Castle Ravenloft, to see his pain, to believe they might redeem or destroy him. Yet his defeat is never permanent. Whether they slay his immortal form or free Barovia's souls, Strahd always returns, for the dark powers have bound his existence to his prison. In Curse of Strahd, this cycle is laid bare. The vampire's defeat only resets the story. The land holds its breath, the mists rise again, and Strahd is reborn, unchanged. Even the most powerful visitors can truly break his curse. In a very recent book, Vecna, Eve of Ruin, Strahd's story briefly intersects with that of Vecna, the Lich God of Secrets, when adventurers come to Barovia through their multiversal quest. Strahd treats them not as prey, but as pawns in his larger designs. His intellect and arrogance make him both ally and threat, a being who knows the boundaries of his cage and yet believes he can exploit them. Here, Strahd's cunning takes center stage. He is no longer merely the predator of the night. He is a being of cosmic awareness, one who understands the nature of his imprisonment and dares to manipulate the forces that made him. Though he cannot escape, he continues to test the limits of his bondage, reaching for godhood through guile, even as his humanity continues to rot away. Every adventurer who crosses Barovia's borders is a mirror for Strahd, a reflection of who he once was. Proud, determined, believing that power can shape destiny. Each time he faces them, the same truth unfolds. Strahd cannot change. He is the unending heartbeat of his own curse, the shadow that feeds the mists. In every age, new heroes step into Barovia's story, and in every age, Strahd von Zarovich greets them from the balcony of Castle Ravenloft, smiling through the storm, certain that this time will be different, that this time, perhaps, the story will end in his favor. But it never does. There are few beings in all the multiverse as pitiful, as majestic, or as enduring as Strahd von Zarovich. His tale began as that of a mortal prince, a man of ambition, conquest, and sacrifice. And it ends as it always does, in silence, atop the battlements of Castle Ravenloft, with the wind howling like a requiem for a soul that can never die. For all his power and cunning, Strahd is not a god, nor a demon, nor even a villain in the conventional sense. He is something rarer, a man whose greatest sin was believing himself greater than the limits of mortality. In life, he sought control over kingdoms. In death, he commands an entire world. And yet, he cannot master his own heart. Barovia, in every sense, is his reflection, vast, beautiful, and rotting from within. In I, Strahd, the Memoirs of a Vampire, Strahd writes of his own descent not as a fall, but as an awakening. He believed that through sacrifice and dark pacts, he had achieved victory over the decay of age and the fear of death. I am the land, he declares, a statement of triumph that becomes, over the centuries, a sentence of eternal servitude. The dark powers granted his wish for immortality, but they shaped it into a mirror of his sin. His thirst for control became literal hunger, his pride eternal imprisonment. Even his love, the purest emotion left to him, was twisted into obsession. Each time Tatiana's soul returns, he sees not a second chance, but a reminder that she will always choose death over him. As Curse of Strahd emphasizes, this cycle is the essence of his punishment. Every rebirth of Tatiana rekindles hope, and every rejection reopens the wound. He is trapped not only by the mists, but by the echo of his own heart, doomed to replay the moment of his downfall forever. Strahd's pride is his armor and his undoing. He will not admit weakness, not even to himself. His archetype is described as the consummate tyrant, a being who maintains his control through fear and illusion, unable to allow any crack to show in his authority. Yet, beneath that facade lies something more fragile than power, the terror of being forgotten. He once commanded legions. Now he rules a ghostly valley that cannot change. He once sought adoration. Now he is worshipped only in fear. Even those who serve him, his vampire spawn, his spies, his brides, Rahadin, all reflections of his need to be obeyed and his inability to love without dominion and domination. Every victory is hollow, every rebellion inevitable. The heroes who come to face him are not merely foes, they are the renewal of the curse itself, an endless reminder that his will can shape everything except fate. Centuries pass within the mists, but time means nothing to Strahd. The world outside Barovia changes, grows, and forgets him. Yet within this valley, the same tragedies play out as though frozen in amber. Villages are born, toil and die, never escaping the shadow of Castle Ravenloft. The land reflects his decay, his forests withered, his skies overcast, its rivers sluggish and dark. Even Strahd himself has grown weary in the monotony. In I, Strahd, he writes of loneliness as a tangible thing, heavier than any coffin lid. The laughter of guests long dead still echo in the halls of his castle. The ghosts of his servants continue their endless routines. And so he finds amusement where he can, toying with travelers, debating philosophy with ghosts, or standing alone on the balcony of his keep, watching lightning split the sky. It is said that when adventurers arrive, he welcomes them with genuine curiosity, for they are the only thing that breaks the tedium of eternity. Yet even this too is part of the cycle. He destroys them and the silence returns. Some believe that Strahd feels no remorse, but that within each dark lord lies a seed of regret that can never bloom into redemption. In Strahd's case, it is a longing for the purity he once glimpsed in Tatiana, and a faint recognition that his greatest enemy has always been himself. He cannot bear to face the truth. Instead, he reframes his tragedy as destiny, convincing himself that he is a victim of love rather than of pride. His intelligence and self-awareness only sharpen the torment. He knows he is damned, but he refuses to accept the justice of it. Thus, his story is not one of madness, but of clarity, the agony of a mind that understands its prison too well, yet still cannot change. If one could stand upon the ramparts of Castle Ravenloft and gaze through the mists, they might see an endless series of mirrors stretching into eternity, each one showing a version of Strahd doomed to the same conclusion. The faces change, the heroes differ, but the story does not. And yet that story endures because it touches something universal. The fear of losing love, the hunger for control, the refusal to let go. In that sense, Strahd's tragedy is not only his own, it is ours, writ large in shadow and blood. As thunder rolls over Barovia, Strahd von Zarovich stands once more upon his balcony. Below, the valley lies cloaked in mist. He thinks of the past, of Tatiana, of victory, of loss. His eyes close, and for a fleeting instant, there is silence. A moment between heartbeats, when he almost remembers what it was like to be human. Then the hunger returns. the story begins again. And so that's the tale of Strahd von Zarovich. It continues as eternal as the mists themselves, a prince who became a monster, a lover consumed by obsession, and a ruler bound to a land that mirrors every shadow of his soul. Barovia endures, the stories repeat, and Strahd waits, patient, clever, and unyielding. If you enjoyed this journey into Gothic horror and D&D, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, hype if you want, so you can join the hype for even more deep dives into the worlds of D&D. Share your thoughts on Strahd, his curse, or your own Barovian adventures in the comments below, because in the land of the Vampire Lord, every story deserves to be told. And remember, the mists are always watching.